there's an interview, a recent interview that was done by PC Gamer. They were talking to Ian Hazzikostas about rebuilding the foundations of World of Warcraft. Now, much of this interview is pretty much what we've heard thus far from Ian Hazzikostas. Nothing really super new, except when they started to talk about failures. Now, I should be clear on this. It is very rare to find companies and corporations talking about failing. Most of the time, they'll just pretend like, fail? What do you mean fail? We didn't fail. We just didn't succeed as hard as we thought we would, right? Even though they lost millions of dollars, it doesn't matter. It was still a victory, even if it is Ferric in nature. But Ian actually admitted straight up in this interview, their biggest mistake came in Shadowlands. But he does say that Shadowlands wasn't the mistake. Shadowlands was just when they started to pay for their mistakes. And I thought that was a very interesting way of putting it. Because it's apt. It's not that Shadowlands were so very different from BFA or even from Legion in many, many ways. It's that Shadowlands had all of the worst mistakes of Legion and BFA perpetuated into that expansion. And then, of course, they paid the price for that. Now, I want to show you guys this because I thought it speaks volumes to Blizzard's ability, because this was the thing that scared me most. Now, this is actually from a few months ago, but we never covered that during the event that took place. But this is from a few months ago. This is also where we got the, you know, the actual player numbers for World of Warcraft. I want to show you guys something, because this is something that fills me with a lot of hope. Is if you want to know if someone is, how likely someone is to repeat the same mistakes, ask them what their mistakes were in the first place. Oftentimes, it's not that people keep repeating the same mistake over and over again. It's that people don't even know what the fucking mistake was. Right? So they don't think that they're repeating the mistake over and over again. And I thought this slide really just summed up Blizzard's takeaways. And it showed that Blizzard really does understand, at least to some extent, what their mistakes and flaws were in Shadowlands. The big one, of course, is story and setting. The Afterlife setting wasn't accessible. I think we can all agree on that, right? I think we can all agree on that. Then we have the new antagonist wasn't developed. Is there anyone that wants to take a stab at this rebuting that? I don't think so. There's no way to refute this. Zuval was not developed. And then well-known story heroes were diminished. I'm looking at Arthas. I'm looking at Arthas and going, what the fuck? So yes, I fundamentally think Blizzard fully understood what the failures of the Shadowlands were. And this fills me with hope that these mistakes will not be repeated again. Because they seem to understand what those mistakes were in the first place. I think the biggest problem I had with the Shadowlands setting, Kimmy, I think as a theme, it could actually have worked. My biggest problem with the Shadowlands setting was the fact that it diminished death. By showing us the afterlives, it sort of removed the teeth of death in World of Warcraft forever. No longer do you need to care about a character dying because we know exactly where that character is going. Right, so that's my only problem with the Shadowlands. I think that's pretty irreparable harm. Hopefully people forget about it, because that's really the only way you can do it. Then, of course, for gameplay, systems didn't evolve with the player experience, borrowed power, not enough variety, community, gaps in content, lack of transparency, didn't feel heard. This is all good and well. The thing I want to really highlight to you guys in this interview, and we'll start with the bad before we go into the good, as is normal for me. Remember what I said a few minutes ago? It is important for me, if I want to know if you're going to repeat the same mistakes, that you actually know what the mistake was. And on this front, I don't believe that Ian and the team fully understand what their mistakes were. So Ian in this interview says one of the biggest mistakes they made in the Shadowlands was they thought that players wanted meaningful choice, because that's always been what World of Warcraft has been about. It's about making those meaningful choices. And in order to have meaningful choices need to have downsides. And from their perspective, obviously the downsides were, if you choose this covenant, you can't choose any of the others. And if you choose this legendary, you can't have any of the others. So that, to them, was an example of a meaningful choice. When he said that, I was like, so first off, technically, sure, it is a meaningful choice, but it's also completely ignoring about 90% of your fucking game. If World of Warcraft was only a story game, that wouldn't matter. But about 90% of the game is about raiding and dungeons. If you're going to lock power behind a fucking choice that locks you out of that choice and then requires a massive amount of work in order to actually make that choice or change that choice, of course people are going to be angry. Because now it's no longer a meaningful choice. It's not a cosmetic choice. It's a pretty strong power incentive that is locked behind a massive amount of work, right? And it felt like clearly Blizzard didn't connect there. Because Ian goes on to explain that players just don't want that anymore. They don't want meaningful choice. They don't want to be locked into decisions. And I'm like, I don't think players would give a fuck about being locked into a decision as long as the decision doesn't hide power. Right? If you gave me a choice between following Xal'atath or following Illyria, right? And it was an irreversible choice, I wouldn't give a shit. I would choose Xal'atath every day of the week. Let's go. Right? And I'd be happy with whatever consequences I may face as a result of that decision. But fundamentally, if you suddenly started saying, if you join Xal'atath, you get a debuff that increases your damage by 50%. But if you join Illyria, you get a debuff that increases your damage by 150%. Now we have a fucking problem, right? Because now, yes, it's a meaningful choice, but there's a clear right choice. And that's the problem. The fact that there was a clear right choice, and for a lot of players, the right choice wasn't necessarily the choice that they wanted to make. And the fact that Blizzard didn't get that from the Shadowlands failings is a little bit problematic to me, because it means there is an opportunity that they could repeat these mistakes in the future. But one thing that I am super excited by, no matter what, and I see a lot of people asking about the Chronicle 4s, I'll talk about it in a second. One thing that I am super excited for is the fact that Ian, again in this interview, makes it very clear they are hyper-focused on us, the players. They are constantly listening to our feedback, listening to what we're saying. What are we talking about? What conversations are we having? And what do we like? What do we dislike? What can they change and how can they change it? So that the game is constantly catering to the things that we want. Now, I will say, as a very old World of Warcraft player, I've played since literally the end of Classic. So I've been playing this game for many, many years. That's never happened in history of World of Warcraft. We've never had this much power over the direction of the story as we have right now. And I think that is super exciting. All we can hope for is that Blizzard still employs a bit of a gatekeeping mechanism to make sure that people don't just get bullshit, right? And start asking for bullshit that destroys the game. But if Blizzard remains, shall we say, responsible with this, I think this is good for all of us, right? Yeah, the Mythic Plus changes is a great example of exactly that. Blizzard listening to the community and finally making a fucking choice that the community's been asking for a really long time. I think all of this just spells really good things, you know, really good things, especially for us. How do you guys feel about the responses from World of Warcraft, the way the developers have been responding to us, talking to us, the amount of this? How do you guys feel as a player of World of Warcraft right now? How do you feel? Do you feel valued, or do you still feel like the developers just don't give a shit? Where do you feel? Like, what's your gut feel? This is super subjective, obviously, but what's your gut feel on this?